Why does a man who seemed interested suddenly disappear without giving explanations? Why does he become a digital ghost after weeks of sweet messages and attention? Picture this scenario. You're checking your phone for the 100th time today, waiting for his response that never comes. His last activity was hours ago, but he hasn't replied to you. You wonder what you did wrong, analyzing every word of your last conversation. According to Sigmund Freud, what we're experiencing isn't random, but the result of deep psychological mechanisms that govern male behavior. The truth is that when a man disappears, he's activating ancient defense mechanisms rooted in his most primitive unconscious. What you're about to discover will forever change how you interpret his silences, his disappearances, his sudden returns. Freud teaches us that behind every seemingly inexplicable behavior lies a psychological truth that, once understood, will give you incredible power in relationships. If you want to continue exploring the most hidden secrets of male behavior, subscribe to the channel. Today you'll discover the first signal that reveals exactly what's happening in his mind when he vanishes. The first signal you must recognize immediately is this: a man disappears precisely when the relationship becomes more intimate. It's not a coincidence, it's a precise psychological mechanism. Imagine that after a perfect evening together, after sharing deep thoughts, after feeling truly connected, he suddenly becomes unreachable. His messages become sporadic, his calls disappear. You remain confused, wondering if you imagined everything. Freud called this phenomenon castration anxiety, a term that goes beyond its literal meaning. It represents the primordial male fear of losing autonomy, of being symbolically castrated by emotional dependency. When a man starts feeling deep emotions, his unconscious activates an alarm system, warning you're losing control. His disappearance isn't punishment toward you, but a defense mechanism against his own vulnerability. The male unconscious associates emotional intimacy with a threat to identity. It's as if a primitive part of his brain tells him, if you get too close, you'll lose yourself. This explains why men often pull away precisely when everything is going well. They're not running from you, they're running from the fear of emotionally depending on someone else. It's an ancestral reflex that leads them to protect what they perceive as their fundamental freedom. The most frustrating part is that this process is completely unconscious. He doesn't wake up thinking, today I'll disappear to make her suffer. His behavior is guided by impulses he doesn't fully understand himself. Recognizing this pattern gives you an incredible advantage. When you see the first signs of withdrawal after moments of great intimacy, you know exactly what's happening. It's not a judgment on you or your connection. It's his psyche struggling with the fear of abandoning the self. Have you ever seen this pattern repeat in your relationships? This escape mechanism from intimacy is only the first piece of the puzzle. In the next chapter, you'll discover how the male unconscious transforms every woman into a maternal image, and why this triggers even more complex and apparently contradictory behaviors. The second mechanism you must understand is devastating in its simplicity. In every man's unconscious, every significant woman automatically becomes a maternal figure. And this triggers explosive psychological dynamics. Imagine being in a relationship for a few months. Initially, he was attentive, caring, constantly courting you. Then gradually he starts behaving like a rebellious teenager, disappearing without warning, not responding to messages, seeming almost annoyed by your attention. You wonder what changed. Freud had identified this process in his concept of transference. The man unconsciously begins projecting onto you all the unresolved dynamics with his mother. He no longer sees you as the woman he fell in love with, but as a figure representing control, responsibility, loss of freedom. This projection is automatic and inevitable. The male brain, faced with a stable relationship, activates neurological patterns formed in childhood. You become the person who could judge him, control him, limit him, exactly how he perceived his mother during adolescence. His disappearance then becomes an act of unconscious rebellion. He's not escaping the real relationship you've built, but the psychological prison his unconscious has created. It's as if he's saying, "Never let any woman control me again." This explains apparently absurd behaviors, why he can be incredibly sweet with you and then disappear for days, why he alternates moments of extreme tenderness with episodes of total detachment, and why he seems to almost punish you for his own emotional dependency. The most tragic part is that the more he feels attached to you, the stronger this maternal projection becomes. His love transforms into a psychological prison from which he must escape to maintain his sense of male identity. Understanding this mechanism frees you from months of self-blame. When he disappears after being particularly affectionate, it's not because you did something wrong. It's because his psyche is reacting to the perceived threat of losing emotional autonomy. The key is recognizing when you're becoming a maternal figure in his eyes. The signs are clear. He starts behaving irresponsibly, tries to provoke you, becomes elusive precisely when you should be closest. Can you recognize this pattern in your experiences? Have you ever felt like you became more of a mother than a partner? But there's a third mechanism even deeper and more revealing. In the next chapter, you'll discover how the male ego uses your suffering to feed its own sense of power, and why the more you suffer, the more he feels unconsciously gratified. The third mechanism is the hardest to accept, but also the most liberating once understood. The male unconscious derives secret gratification from your emotional suffering. It's not meanness, it's a primitive psychological need to feel powerful. Imagine this situation. He reads your messages without responding. He sees your missed calls. He knows perfectly well you're suffering, wondering what happened, yet he continues ignoring you, not out of cruelty, but because a deep part of him feeds on that demonstration of how important he is to you. Freud had intuited this mechanism in his study of the pleasure principle. The male unconscious needs concrete proof of its emotional power over others. Your suffering becomes the most powerful confirmation of his ability to influence you, to be central in your emotional life. This explains why men often seem to disappear precisely when you're most vulnerable, when you need them most. It's not conscious sadism, but an unconscious impulse that drives them to continuously test their power over you. The dynamic is subtle but devastating. The more you suffer from his absence, the more he feels unconsciously valued. It's as if his primitive ego thinks, if she's hurting because of me, it means I'm truly important, that I have power over her. This unconscious gratification creates a perverse psychological addiction. He begins associating your emotional pain with confirmation of his own masculine worth. Disappearing then becomes a way to recharge his ego, to feel desirable and powerful again. The mechanism is even crueler because it works independently of his conscious feelings for you. He can love you deeply on a rational level, but continue disappearing to satisfy this unconscious need for emotional dominance. Recognizing this pattern protects you from unconscious manipulation. When you understand that your suffering feeds his primitive ego, you can choose not to give him this gratification. You can respond to his disappearances with indifference instead of desperation. The key is understanding it's not personal. His need to feel you suffer has nothing to do with who you are as a person. It's a blind mechanism that would activate with any significant woman in his life. This allows you to maintain emotional power. Instead of reacting with anxiety to his disappearances, you can recognize them for what they are, unconscious attempts to feed his ego through your pain. Have you ever noticed how some men seem to wake up precisely when you stop suffering for them? How they return exactly when you're no longer waiting? In the next chapter, you'll discover the opposite but complementary mechanism. How the male unconscious needs your rejection to keep desire alive, and why your total availability can kill his attraction. The fourth mechanism reveals a shocking truth. The male unconscious is programmed to desire what it cannot easily have. Your total availability can kill his attraction, while your rejection feeds it explosively. Imagine you've always responded immediately to his messages, always been available when he sought you, always said yes to his invitations. Then suddenly he starts becoming cold, detached, less interested. You wonder why your dedication isn't appreciated. Freud had understood that the male psychic apparatus is built around the tension principle. Desire is born from lack, difficulty, challenge. When he easily obtains what he wants, interest automatically wanes because the psychological tension that feeds attraction disappears. This ancestral mechanism derives from hunting instinct. The primitive male brain is programmed to pursue, conquer, overcome obstacles. When the prey surrenders voluntarily, the hunt ends, and with it the dopamine release that creates emotional addiction. His disappearance after your total availability isn't ingratitude, but an inevitable neurophysiological consequence. His brain interprets your ease as a signal that you're not precious enough to require effort. This is why men often distance themselves from women who are most in love, most available, most generous. Not because they don't appreciate these qualities, but because the absence of resistance kills the erotic tension necessary to keep desire alive. Conversely, when you're not immediately available, when you maintain a certain distance, when you don't respond immediately to his messages, his primitive brain activates. This woman has value. I must conquer her. Difficulty becomes psychological aphrodisiac. This explains the most frustrating paradox of relationships, why he seeks you more when you're less interested, why he returns precisely when you've stopped waiting, why he seems to fall more in love with women who make him suffer. It's not masochism, it's biological programming. His unconscious associates difficulty with value. A woman too easy to obtain is automatically downgraded in terms of desirability, not out of cruelty, but through evolutionary mechanism. Understanding this gives you incredible power. Instead of interpreting his loss of interest as personal failure, you can recognize it as a consequence of your excessive availability. The solution isn't becoming cold or manipulative, but maintaining a healthy dose of unpredictability, independence, your own life that keeps him constantly in a state of slight uncertainty about your interest. Have you ever noticed how his behavior changes when you become less available? How he seems to wake up precisely when you're about to give up? The next mechanism will show you how the male unconscious manages fear of abandonment through preventive abandonment, and why he often leaves you before you can leave him. The fifth mechanism is perhaps the most self-destructive. The male unconscious prefers to abandon rather than risk being abandoned. It's a defense strategy that destroys the best relationships to protect the ego from future wounds. Imagine a perfect situation. The relationship is going well, there's harmony, affection, common projects. Then suddenly he starts creating problems from nothing, becomes critical, distant, almost as if he's looking for reasons to fight. It seems he's voluntarily sabotaging something beautiful. Freud had identified this behavior in his studies of defense mechanisms. When the unconscious perceives a future threat, even imaginary, it activates preventive strategies to avoid the pain of abandonment. It's better to hurt than be hurt. Better to control your own pain than suffer it. The male brain, evolutionarily programmed to avoid vulnerability, develops a form of relational paranoia. It starts looking for signs of possible future rejection, interprets every hesitation as proof that sooner or later you'll abandon him. This fear becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. The more he fears you might leave him, the more he behaves in ways that actually push you away. It's a vicious circle born from his inability to manage emotional uncertainty. His disappearance then becomes an act of preventive control. Instead of passively waiting for possible future rejection, he takes initiative in distancing. It's as if he thinks, if I leave first, she can't hurt me. This mechanism is particularly active in men who experienced early abandonment, divorced parents, absent mothers, traumatic past relationships. Their unconscious is hypervigilant about possible abandonment signals and reacts disproportionately. The tragedy is, they often destroy genuine relationships for fear of imaginary losses. The woman is truly in love, wants to build something serious, but he interprets her very intensity as future threat. If she's so involved now, when she leaves me, I'll suffer too much. Recognizing this pattern allows you not to take his relational sabotage personally. When he starts looking for problems from nothing, when he becomes suddenly critical, when he seems to want to fight, know he's probably implementing a preventive abandonment strategy. The key is not falling into the trap. Don't react to his provocation with anger or desperation, because you'd confirm his unconscious fear. Instead, maintain calm and try to reassure him about relationship stability without appearing needy. Have you ever experienced situations where he seemed to want to ruin everything precisely when things were going best? When he appeared more frightened by relationship success than by problems? The last mechanism you'll discover is perhaps the most revealing: how the male unconscious uses intermittent return to maintain psychological control, and why his reappearances always follow a precise and predictable pattern. The final mechanism is the most manipulative and simultaneously the most unconscious. The man uses intermittent reinforcement to maintain your interest. He always returns, but never when you expect it, creating psychological addiction that can last years. Imagine you've finally accepted his disappearance. You've stopped checking your phone, started going out with other men, feel finally free. And precisely at that moment, when you're no longer waiting, his message arrives. A sweet, nostalgic message that immediately reignites all emotions you thought buried. Freud hadn't specifically theorized this phenomenon, but his studies on reward mechanisms perfectly explain this dynamic. The brain develops strongest addiction when gratification arrives unpredictably and intermittently. It's the same principle as slot machines. You don't know when the win will come, but you know it will eventually come. This keeps the brain in constant waiting state, releasing small dopamine doses every time there's possibility of reward. His unconscious has learned this pattern through experience. He knows if he disappears completely, he'll lose control over you, but also knows if he remains too present, he'll lose your interest. Intermittent return is the perfect strategy to maintain emotional control without truly committing. The timing of his returns isn't random. He always returns when his ego needs confirmation, when he feels lonely, when other options are finished, or when he senses you're finally moving on. It's as if he has emotional radar warning him when you're about to free yourself definitively. Each return reactivates your attachment system, canceling months of emotional healing. It's the cruelest mechanism because it keeps you in permanent psychological limbo, not present enough to build something real, not absent enough to let you forget him. The most frustrating part is he's probably not even aware of this manipulation. His unconscious has simply learned this strategy works to get attention and validation without giving anything in return. Recognizing this pattern is liberating, but also painful. It means accepting his returns aren't moved by genuine love, but by selfish need to maintain control over your emotional life. The solution is breaking the cycle. When he returns after disappearing, instead of welcoming him enthusiastically, recognize it for what it is, an attempt to reactivate your emotional dependency. Your response must be measured, detached, non-reactive. Only this way can you break the hypnotic power of intermittent reinforcement and free yourself from dynamics that can keep you prisoner for years. Can you recognize this pattern in your experience? Have you ever noticed how his returns always follow the same emotional timing? This knowledge frees you from confusion, self-blame, desperate search for explanations. Now you know his disappearances don't depend on what you did or didn't do, but on unconscious mechanisms governing male behavior. The question now is, what will you do with this awareness? Will you continue suffering these patterns or use them to regain control of your emotional life? If this video opened your eyes, write your city in the comments, so I'll know where this incredible community of aware women comes from. Hit like if you recognize at least one of these mechanisms in your experiences, and subscribe to the channel if you want to continue discovering the most hidden secrets of male psychology. Share this video with every woman who needs to hear these truths. Together, we can free ourselves from unconscious psychological games and build relationships based on awareness instead of dependency. Thank you for being part of this community of growth and transformation. I always read you, and your stories inspire me every day to continue this work. From which city are you watching? Comment down below.